that Jesus is telling them about this on this special day called Pentecost. Let me give you a little background and history because Pentecost is nothing but a Hellenistic word for the Hebrew Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks is described in Leviticus chapter 23. It would do you real good to just go read that. Leviticus chapter 23, it starts at verse 15. It describes to us the Feast of Weeks, which is 7 days or 7 weeks after the Passover celebration. Now, I know you guys have been in church long enough to know what the Passover is. It is when the Israelites were in Egyptian captivity, and God told them to sacrifice a lamb and take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorpost of all the houses of the Israelites, so that when God sent the death angel, when the death angel seen the blood on the house, he would pass over that house. Now, you ain't got to say nothing, but think to yourself, I'm glad I'm covered by the blood. Yeah. So 7 weeks after the Festival of Weeks, which is 7 weeks after the celebration of the Passover, is the day of Pentecost, 50 days after the celebration of weeks. And it gives us detail about the history of Pentecost, this celebration or Festival of Weeks. In the celebration, it is a series of sacrifices, a series of offerings. The first thing they do, they give what is called a wave offering. In the wave offering, they bake bread, unleavened bread, and they bring that to the altar. But it's interesting. It's an interesting sacrifice because they don't give it to the altar. They don't lay it on the altar. They don't set it on fire, but they take it and they wave it. And in their waving their offering, what they're doing is saying to God, God, this belongs to you. See, you didn't really realize that Big Mama and them had something when they would say that when you can't say a word, you can just wave your hands. Yeah, somebody in here has been through a situation that's been so tough, that's been so rough that you didn't even know the words to say. But aren't you glad that you could just wave your hands? And when you wave your hands, one, you say to God, God, this belongs to you. And what you also do is say to the devil, devil, everything you had your hands on, once I give it to God, you got to take your hands off of it. Yeah, you got to understand the power in just waving your hands. That's one sacrifice. The next sacrifice they gave is called a burnt offering. The burnt offering, they would take meat and they would cook the meat. And when they cooked the meat, what the offering was is when the fragrance and the smoke and the aroma would come off of the cooked meat, it would float into heaven. And what that is symbolic of, I love this, is the praise of God's people. Because sometimes a wave will do, but if it's anybody in the house that has been at a place in your life that God has been so good to you, a wave won't do. Sometimes you got to open up your mouth and tell God, thank you, when he made a way out of no way. A wave couldn't suffice. I had to stand up on my feet and give God a praise, a sacrifice from my lips. I love it. And these sacrifices are for the purpose of forgiveness, peace, and a harvest. Forgiveness, peace, and a harvest. And I think that I could be bold enough to testify that if I pass the mic around, everybody in here has done something wrong in their life. But aren't you glad that you've been forgiven? So there's praise always worthy if you've ever committed a sin but not going to hell. If you've ever done anything wrong but God did not charge you for that sin because, again, you covered by the blood. Everybody can give God praise for forgiveness, but not just forgiveness, for peace. Aren't you glad Jesus says that I will give you my peace? Yeah, his peace is different than the world's peace. The world's peace is connected to circumstances. That when all the bills are paid, when your kids are on the honor roll, when your husband bring you flowers, that's when you have the world's peace. But guess what? The world's peace is connected to what's happening. So what if the bill collector start calling, if your spouse start acting crazy, then there goes the peace that the world gives. gives. But God said, no, I don't give you peace like the world. I give you my peace. My peace means the winds can be blowing, the rain can be falling, but you can stand in the middle of the storm and know everything is going to be all right. So if you got bill collectors calling, I still got peace. Even if my marriage is rocky, I still got peace. Is it anybody in the house that can give God some praise? Not for a promotion, not for more money, but thank God for the peace that's over your life. Devil trying to destroy you, but you still got peace. Folk hating on you, but you still got peace. We got to learn what is valuable in the kingdom of God. And here's the best thing. He says, you do all that and I'll give you a harvest. But here's what's interesting in the text about the harvest. He says that I'm going to give you a harvest, but when you reap the harvest, I only want you to reap the middle of the harvest. Because I'm going to provide you so much that the middle will be enough to take care of you and your family. And what I want you to leave are the edges. I want you to leave the edges to be a blessing to the poor and the less fortunate. See, y'all don't even know when to shout. What God is saying to you is that when your harvest comes, it's not going to just be enough for you, but God's going to give you an overflow blessing so that somebody that is less fortunate than you will be able to reap the benefits of your obedience. See, Acts chapter 2, it says to us, watch this, because they've been waiting and now something begins to happen. It says, when the day of Pentecost had arrived, they were all together in one place. They were all together in one place. I need y'all to pay attention for me. Everybody watching on live stream, take some notes, write this stuff down. I want to take you to seminary just for a minute. I'm going to teach and preach all at the same time. Are y'all okay with that? So this is when we read this particular text, it's much more to the text than what meets the eye. It says that when the day of Pentecost had arrived. But when you look at this word arrived, the Greek word that is translated into arrive is actually the word it's called symplerou. Symplerou. Not to be impressive, I just want you to understand what this means. So a better translation of that from Greek to English is not arrived, but a better translation would be fulfilled. So that when the day had been fulfilled, or when the day had come to fruition. Pastor, what does that mean? That means that that day had been prophesied. That day had been declared. That day had been ordained. God said that on this day, what I've been promising you is going to happen on that day. And all I wanted to tell somebody is that you never know, today might be your symplerou moment. That's why God allowed his spirit to fall in this place, because there's somebody who God has spoken something to. God has given you a promise. God has told you something, and today might be the very day that God fulfills or brings to fruition what he promised. And I just come to say, on the day of Pentecost, it's a good day for God to show up and give you a symplerou moment. Yeah, and if we really believe that, we don't have to wait until it happens, but we understand that God is able. This is a day that has been predicted. I love it. Not only that, when we go to the next verse, verse 2, watch. Verse 2 says, after the day had arrived, it says, suddenly a sound like a violent rushing wind came from heaven, and it filled the whole house. Don't miss that. I think that I have to pause and mention to you how it seems like biblically, whenever God is moving, that it's always a sound connected to the move of God. Now, I wish I was smart enough. I don't know, because you can't really pinpoint it, but it's confusing. It's baffling to me. It's a conundrum to me of what happens first. Is it that there's God's move in our lives, and that sound generates a sound from his people? So when God moves, his moving generates a sound from his people? Or could it be that when God's people make a sound, it invokes movement from God? I don't know, but my little short life when I've been living, I found out that when I learned how to bless God through my pain and my circumstances, when I learned how to stand up and suck up whatever I'm going through, through and give God praise, it seems like God always moves in the midst of my praise. The Bible actually tells us that he inhabits the praises of his people. So I just believe if that we learn how to give God praise, God will move in a response to our praise. Okay, let me make it make sense to you. It says that the sound, watch this, filled the whole house. It filled the whole house. So I would assume that if we can fill God's house with praise, that he will move in response to our shout for my babies. I'll shout for my finances. I'll shout for my peace of mind. The next time I open up my mouth, I'm going to go ahead and shout for my whole row. Tell your neighbor, keep sitting down like you don't know how good God has been. But for me and my house, we will bless the Lord. I dare you to give God a praise like you know he going to make a way for you. Yeah, okay. The sound fills the house. Can I show you something else real quick? Can I show you something? Please write this down. Y'all watching in California, Georgia, all over the place. Write this down. The word filled is an interesting word as well. This word is a cousin to arrive. It's a cousin to arrive. So instead of the word simpleru, it's simply playru. This word playru is translated into feel. But it's interesting, a better or closer translation from Greek would be not feel, but accomplish or to make complete. And notice that this feel is connected with the house. So the sound comes and it fills the house. It makes complete or accomplishes what need to be done in the house. It essentially sets the house in order. Yeah, what God is telling me to tell you is that watch, that we as the people cannot be impacted by the Spirit until the Spirit first impacts the house. The house has to be set in order. Jesus says, you've made my house a den of thieves. It should be called a house of prayer. When the Spirit comes, we can't even benefit from the Spirit until God sets the house in order. I just believe in these days, in this season, that God is coming trying to set the house in order. He said, a rushing wind, and when this rushing wind comes, it fills the whole house. So I could imagine the power of God's presence shaking the blinds and shaking the room and shaking the chairs, and they don't know what's going on, and all of a sudden tongues of fire. Do you understand the miracle that's taking place? Tongues of fire come from the ceiling, and it divides and it rests upon each of them. Here's what I also like within this text. You got to pay attention to the words. This word rest is another Greek word. The Greek word is kathazo or kathizo. And the word, it means rest, but it means something more than rest. A more accurate translation of the word, or more widely used translation of the word is appointed or chosen. Y'all missing this. So these tongues come down from heaven and they divide in the room. And the text says that they rest individually on the disciples. But it really is not resting, it's really choosing. Y'all missing this. The tongues of fire come from heaven, and it's not just resting, it's appointing. It's saying you and you and you. And watch this, only the ones who have been obedient to Jesus, only the ones who have been following Jesus, only the ones who have been made disciples, these tongues fall and rest on them and appoint them. And can I show you that the disciples weren't very impressive? They weren't very smart people. They were kind of rugged dudes. They was fishermen. They really weren't upper echelon, erudite people. No, they were more subtle. They were more unlearned men. So people would have looked at them and said that you're not qualified to do what you're thinking you should be doing. You don't have enough skills. But aren't you glad when other people say you can't? Jesus still can choose you and appoint you. That there's some things that you've been blessed to do in your life that everybody in your family told you wasn't going to be able to do it. People in your own family told you wasn't qualified, but God still forgot about what they said and put his hands on you and chose you. Somebody ought to be glad that you can look in the mirror and say, I might not be perfect, but I'm chosen. I might not be flawless, but I've been chosen by God. And what God has chosen you to do, the devil can't even stop you from doing it. This